Ladies and gentlemen, that we are going to start our online seminar today now. And before I say anything, let me say that welcome every one of you, and we also, of course, welcome. We already have two speakers here, one from United States and the other one from Japan. And I'm going to speak for a while in Chinese, then I summarize my kind of introduction, opening comment after that Chinese version. OK， 各位同学，欢迎到这个 online 的这个研讨会哈。那很高兴看到，我们大概有50几位了啊。那我看了一下名单，很多老同学啊，还有很多老朋友啊，那么也有很多新朋友啊，而且你们的背景，我想应该对这个我们这次讲的题目，对你们应该是还蛮有用的哦。那希望我们还继续经常保持联系。那昨天我们跟2位speakers 已经讲了啊，那么他们的 background 你们看到了，都很有经验，学经历都非常好啊。那有些对你们从事的工作，我认为应该大有帮助。那昨天我们特别请他们，就是说在中间休息的时候，我们不是每一场有10分钟的休息吗？他们也继续把他的这个就会议的这个screen 打开，那有问题，那个5分钟、10分钟也可以继续问嘛，或是特别是你们这个我知道交大有老师对 blockchain 也很有兴趣，那 Mike 我们第一位 speaker 就是这方面的专家啊，他有理工的背景，那么也念过很好的大学 UPenn 啦、NYU 啦，都是很强的 background 啊，那打了很多官司等等啊。那所以呢，除了这个以外，我们今天呢，事实上的题目，我们就是专门挑最近很重要的议题哈，那找到我们认为蛮好的老师哈。那你看那个Mike 他要讲这个所谓这个元宇宙啦、区块链啦、NFT 啦等等哈。那么这个就是现在台湾很热门的嘛啊。那么赛道上呢，他要开始讲到这个专利的转让估价啊，就是这些 valuation 的问题啦、Simon 啦等等啊。那我是认为这一个也是特别又谈到IP 的这个 due diligence 好，那么他们2位详细的背景我就不再重复，因为等一下那个洪光、那个 Henry 那个徐洪光呢就会把他们更详细的介绍给我们。那么这样子呢，将来你们有问题的话，就可以请教他们。好，那么到下午呢，就是张正伦老师就要开始讲那个营业秘密的问题。那这个问题呢，台湾也出了很多重大的争议嘛，那么我是认为这个以他过去在美国、中国大陆、台湾的这个经验呢，我想他对这一方面在实务理论呢都很有过去有很多案子，事实上他说这亲自涉入主导啊，但是有一些当然因为有些官司还在进行嘛，所以有些他可能不方便把这个个案讲得太详细，但是我看了他那个PowerPoint 堂堂40-50页啊，那你们是值回本钱了，光这一堂课就值回你们老本了啦啊。所以呢，我想这个将来你们还可以继续有什么问题继续联络。那我们呢也有那个世博 Leo，他特别对这个生医领域的这个专利适合性，他也要这个来跟我们讲解哈。那么你们有些同学也上过这个世博的课哈。那生医这个领域呢，台湾的政府也花了很多心血啊，所以我想这个对我们应该很有利了哈。那最后2位这个speaker 呢是在德国他们都现在在慕尼黑。那 Dr. 郭的呢，最近几天，昨天还给我写信，2、3天前跟我写信那么他讲的就是目前欧洲的这个单一专利啦、专利法院啦等等的这个问题那么Benali 呢，就是也要谈到这个有些立法，还有那个法院的实际的情况那这一部分呢，就要拜托那个徐小文老师呢来替大家来做一些介绍了等等 ，OK。所以呢，大概我们今天的节目很紧凑，那么我希望你们能那个这个利用机会在 Q&A 的时候呢，多跟老师们交流。那我特别拜托他们说，他们 Q&A 以后的 break 最好呢能继续这个来回答我们同学的问题，他们也答应了所以我想这样子你们的问题随时可以得到这个答案那我要请各位也注意一下，明年2月底我要回去台湾，我们有另外一个比较，就像跟我们以前过去一样，现在因为疫情还不是完全那么确定，我们只能用少数。好在我们也50来个报名，而且我看他的 qualification 都非常好。那么，但是那个明年呢，我们就要回复到以前的大型的研讨会。那我们那些老朋友，这个 Judge Wheeler 啦、Goda 啦、Marty Edelman、Tamai， 他们应该都一直要求一定要开个实体的啦。所以你们要把日期记下来那很多人一直想也来讲课，我已经委婉的告诉他们，我那个人太多了啦。这个没有办法容纳那么多这个speakers。OK， 那这一步呢，我就开场白，我就先这样子。那我要用几分钟，因为我们有美国朋友跟日本朋友在这里，那么他们有些人多少懂一下中文，但是我还是礼貌上，我把刚刚讲的简要的告诉他们。那么我们就可以请麦克来开始讲课那Mike and Mr. Saito, I just mentioned to all the participants about the structure of today, the programs and topics, and then also mentioned that you are so nice that during that 10 minutes break, if there's additional question, you are willing to talk to them. And I believe talk about you, two of you, but I also mentioned Henry will give you more detail, give them more detailed, introductions. Okay, and so looks like we are pretty happy and to have all of you with us. And I also stated that many of the participants actually, some of them, as I mentioned to you yesterday, they have different fields and that are highly qualified. Many of them got master, PhD, and in that field, which very important. Biotech, blockchain, and semiconductor, and all of them. So that's what I mentioned to them. So I think it's about time. I think we can start the program. Okay.
Very good.
Any questions?
Not for me. I'll go first so I can share my presentation.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Henry from ATIP Management Corporation. So Professor Polio, Lucas, Mike, and Saido. So this is my honor to introduce our first speaker to the first agenda to introduce NFT, blockchain, and the Metaverse. Michael Kasdan focused on all areas of intellectual property law that range from patents, trademark, copyright, trade secret litigation, and all the IP-related transactions, including licensing and monetization. And Michael developed effective offensive and defensive patent strategy for organizations of all sizes. And what is most impressive to me is that recently Michael helped his client to invalidate patents in the IPR, but the patents was previously won a verdict in hundreds of millions of dollars in the litigation against Apple. I think that is what made me more excited. So today we have this opportunity to have Michael to introduce to these hot topics. And Michael also have the experience working for Panasonic for many years. So I mean, his experience in in-house counsel and also outside counsel make him capable of doing almost every kind of intellectual property, dispute, litigation, and all kinds of work. So I think this is a very good opportunity. We can have this topic from Michael. So Michael, please show your, let us go. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Henry, for that very kind introduction, and thank you, Professor Liu, for kicking us off. And thank you all for coming. So it's really my pleasure to present. I know the conference has a long and great history, and so I'm honored to be here. Like Henry said, you know, I've been throughout my career pretty traditional IP lawyer, focusing a lot on the patent side, litigation, licensing, monetization. But recently, I've done a lot of work in the IP side of advising clients who are focused on blockchain and digital assets. And I came to that work really it was client driven. A couple of my clients had patents they were working on in the blockchain field. So, you know, patent attorneys, we have to learn the new technology. And also I just found the world was changing. I was trying to understand what was happening in the world with digital art and collectibles being sold for a lot of money and cryptocurrency. Yeah, I just started really sharing news, sharing articles with smart friends. Basically, it turned into Wiggin and Dana, my law firm. I started our blockchain and digital assets group that focuses on NFTs, and it's a joint group between IP, corporate, and art lawyers. And so we've been doing that. That was just earlier this year. Although I've been in this space for about 3 or 4 years now. So today, I just basically want to make this area that I think is sort of mystifying to many, hopefully a little bit more clear. Explain, you know, what are NFTs, you know, what is blockchain, what is Web3, and why we should care about it. I came to this space very skeptical. You know, cryptocurrency, I think, is pretty controversial. It's an unregulated currency. And I was not, and still am not, a big believer in trading in cryptocurrency. But over the past few years, I've seen many interesting use cases and many interesting IP techniques that look very familiar for a licensing lawyer. So I'll explain kind of why I think it's exciting and interesting. The metaverse, that's another thing that we hear, especially since we're spending more and more time in digital spaces. And even though this is not a fully immersive digital space, we're in a type of metaverse right now, right? I'm here in New Jersey, talking to you in Taiwan, and Saito-san is in Japan, and we're all, sitting next to each other virtually. And I think that's a pretty interesting space that's connected to blockchain in a certain way that I'll explain. I do want to go through also the use cases and applications. I think that's the most interesting. I think one thing about NFTs that makes it a little bit difficult to understand is it's a very, very broad asset class that can be applied to really tokenize anything digital, so anything in virtual space. And you can also tokenize things in the real world. So I think a lot of people, when they think about NFTs, I think because of the original sort of news items, think about art or digital art. But I think the applications, there are other applications that I think are far more interesting. I want to talk about some of the benefits, some of the criticisms, and then talk about the IP issues, and then of course leave time for questions. So that's what I hope to cover today. This is the disclaimer that all lawyers have to put in their slides, so I put this in mine. But like I said, I want to kind of demystify some of these, and I think the best way to understand this topic, I think, just like any good licensing lawyer, you have to kind of understand it from a business perspective, from a technology perspective to a certain extent, and then from a legal perspective. And for me, I focus on the IP side of that. But what are these things? Why are they valuable? What are some of the risks, right? This is a new emerging area, and even though it's exciting, in new emerging areas come with a lot of risk. And what are some of the key issues to kind of understand and focus on? So what are NFTs? The acronym stands for non-fungible tokens. So to understand what a non-fungible token is, you have to first understand what a fungible token is. Fungible, the word just means it's exchangeable, not unique. So any money is exchangeable, right? One gold coin I can exchange for another gold coin, and they have the same value, so they're fungible, replaceable. The first application of blockchain that was widely used was digital currency like Bitcoin and Ethereum. Those are fungible tokens, right? One Bitcoin you can exchange for another Bitcoin, and they're all the same. So non-fungible tokens means it's a token that represents ownership or access to something unique. And when I say tokenize, to make this token is really just to digitally represent something. And it could be something online or something in the real world. So any sort of object can be digitized. Like I said, some of the early, NFTs, it were, JPEGs, GIFs, videos, tweets. Like Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, sold an NFT of the very, very first tweet. Right, it's like a historical moment. You can own a piece of history. There are artists that sold NFTs for very high valuations. Collectibles is another thing, like trading cards. Like I used to collect baseball cards when I'm a kid, and now we have collectibles that are digital versions of that. But also things like tickets, access to special clubs, and thinking about the metaverse, you can also have tokens or NFTs that represent accessories in a video game, clothing, weapons, your avatar online, a piece of digital property inside of a virtual space, inside of a video game. So these are all digital assets, and they can all be tokenized. And once they're tokenized, you can buy them and sell them, using currency. In the beginning times, most are sold using cryptocurrency, but that doesn't necessarily have to be. And in fact, companies like MasterCard, credit card company, recently announced that they're going to be allowing the purchase of NFTs with MasterCard credit card. So how does this, all work? So when you create an NFT, when you tokenize something, it's called minting. And And when you mint an NFT, what you store it on the blockchain. So the commonality between cryptocurrency and NFTs is they both use blockchain technology. So what is blockchain technology? Blockchain is a decentralized ledger technology. So decentralized ledger that's visible to all. So when you think about, I think about when I used to have a bank book and I'd write a check, that's a ledger that I see. This is a decentralized ledger, everybody sees it. And when you think about it with currency, you know, for example, the person on the left of the figure maybe has $10 and they transact something for $2 to the person on the right. So the account of the person on the right goes up by $2, the account of the person on the left goes down by $2, and everybody sees that. It's a state. What's interesting about blockchain, so it was first applied to digital currency transactions, and it's decentralized. So in many ways, it can be more secure. It doesn't have to be controlled by one central gatekeeper like our current banks. And what's interesting though is, you know, it doesn't only have to be currency. You know, cryptocurrency was kind of the first use case for blockchain, and it makes sense. But a decentralized ledger is just something that can keep track of the state of something. It's a state machine. So you can keep track of the state of money, like $8 or $10 or $12. You can also keep track of the state of ownership of an asset. So keeping track of the fact that I own this asset or I bought this asset at this price during this time. And so if you store all this in this ledger that can't be changed, you can keep track of ownership of assets in a very secure way. The way that NFTs are minted on the blockchain uses something called smart contracts. It's actually not the best phrase. It's not necessarily smart. That depends on who's programming it. And it's not a legal contract. It's really just software code. It's like if-then statements. I'll talk about it more in the next slide. But the smart contract defines the rules for that NFT. And once the NFT is out there, it can be bought and sold. There's some pretty well-known exchanges, at least, you know, in the US, OpenSea is a big one. Now, a little bit more on smart contracts. So smart contracts are how NFTs are written to the blockchain when they're created. And like I said, it's just bits of software code, if-then statements. And you can build in all sorts of rules. So smart contracts is an interesting development, I think, on its own, even without NFTs, because I think there are all sorts of transactions that happen in the world that would be interesting to automate and have kind of self-enforcement through software, not relying on humans or decision makers or how someone feels on a certain day, but it's predetermined that it functions in this way. And I'll give some examples of it. But smart contracts is interesting, and it's also a piece of how NFTs are created onto the blockchain. So when you create an NFT, you can build in certain rules for how that NFT is transacted. You can define who you can sell to, what happens when you sell, who makes money when you sell on secondary sales, how royalty streams are distributed. So you can build in all these rules into software that governs that NFT for its life. So I also just want to talk about one other piece of terminology that you hear a lot in this space when we're talking about NFTs and blockchain and the metaverse, and that's Web3. So I saw everyone using this term Web3, and you know, in order to figure out what Web3 is, we have to understand perhaps first what Web2 is, and from there what Web1 was. So I remember Web1. I'm old enough, you know, like in the 90s, to remember kind of the first versions of the internet when we got on the internet, and it was all, you know, sort of static, read-only pages, you know, HTML. It was kind of like brochure. Web 2 refers to the internet that most of us kind of know now. That's driven by dynamic content, but also largely by social platforms or large gatekeepers. So you can do things like, so companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon you know, they act as gatekeepers. You can do things like log in with Facebook, right? Log in with Twitter. They control your access. They store your passwords. And what's interesting about Web 2 is that when you think about the economies of Web 2, it's the companies that are the pipelines, like Facebook and Google are some examples that I'm familiar with. Those companies seem to be taking a lot of the profits, right? The content creators, when you maybe write an article or take a picture, you know, one thing you know about the internet is there's plenty of content, and content is oftentimes free. But it's the pipeline providers that are taking a lot of the profits. And it's true in many industries. It's true in the music industry when you think about streaming, the amount of money that streaming platforms make versus artists. So one interesting thing about Web3 is the internet of blockchain, of decentralized applications. And what's different about that is it sees more of a peer-to-peer. You don't need any one gatekeeper. You don't even need one bank. Like, you have your own wallet, right? You know, theoretically with your own cryptocurrency, and you hook up your wallet to the blockchain and you can transact. So you don't need a bank. You know, you don't need Google. You know, every user has their own wallet, controls their own data, and can transact. And so that's a pretty big shift, and I don't think it's anything that's going to happen immediately. And it also has its own challenges, because if you're going to transact and do commerce, it's still important to have marketplaces and centralized places. OpenSea, where many NFTs are sold, is an example of a centralized marketplace. So it's not totally decentralized, and I don't think decentralization is always great for everything. But there's an ability to eliminate, to basically deliver more value down to content creators. So a lot of people see the promise of Web3, and I understand that the promise, potential and reality don't always match up. And sometimes it takes time, and sometimes they never match up. But the promise of Web3 is that content creators can more easily reach markets and more easily take their share of the profits. And the pipelines and platforms will take less of that, because you don't need this centralized middleman anymore. So that's Web3. This is just a chart, you know, summarizing it. You know, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, which I just went through. And this is, I think, an interesting tweet from Jack Dorsey, who was the founder of Twitter. And, you know, just talking about some of the philosophy, the ethos of Web 3, and how, you know, to him, what's important about Bitcoin and about NFTs is that, you know, you're not controlled by any single large entity. And look, that brings its own set of interesting problems. You know, in cryptocurrency right now, there's a lot of fraud and there's a lot of money laundering, and it's a bit like the Wild West. And so it brings problems, but it's also, you know, to many, an important kind of innovation. So the last sort of topic that I wanted to introduce before I go more in depth is, you know, the metaverse. And I talked about the metaverse earlier. I think when many people think about the metaverse, you know, we think about science fiction, right? 3D holographic spaces where digital representations of ourselves, you know, can sit and interact and do things. And, you know, and we're not quite there yet, technology-wise. I know some people building different metaverses. Some of them are using some very sophisticated video game engines and look pretty good. And, you know, sometimes you use, you know, immersive, you know, VR or AR technology. But I think, you know, broadly speaking, so the definition of metaverse is a virtual reality space where users can interact, you know, with the computer and the environment, other users. So, you know, this is a metaverse of sorts right now. You know, the upper left-hand drawing is kind of maybe the next level of this, where maybe avatars that represent ourselves will all be sitting around a table. And I've been in some of those metaverses. It's still a little bit difficult to move around and interact. it doesn't feel quite human yet, but I think, we're still very early. And at the bottom are some more like entertainment and commerce examples. In the U.S., Snoop Dogg and Eminem were on MTV, and they did this performance where avatars they turned into their digital avatars, and they were represented by Bored Apes, which is one of the big NFT collections. And that's shown on the bottom. On the bottom left is a city, and I was recently in a Metaverse representation of New York City that looked pretty good. And you can walk around it, and people can offer, you can set up your shop, you can sell things. So it's interesting. I find that discussions of the Metaverse and how important and big it will be tend to differ depending on maybe what generation you come from. So I think, my father's generation that doesn't play video games, maybe thinks it's something that's maybe in the future and doesn't quite understand why we're wasting our time with it. My son's generation, where he spends a lot of time in video games and virtual spaces, and wouldn't think twice about spending real money on a digital object that he can wear inside of a video game or virtual space, or take between virtual spaces. He thinks of it very differently, and I think I'm somewhere in the middle. But I do know that it will continue to develop, and the way that blockchain doesn't always fit into the metaverse, but one of the promises of blockchain, and it's not an easy thing to develop, but there are some people that are working on it and developing different solutions, is if you have different platforms, if you store your digital avatar and digital accessories on the blockchain, you can take them between different metaverse spaces. So it's kind of a natural, as we evolve to the metaverse, people think that blockchain will be this good sort of system that allows for interoperability between those platforms. So that's a little bit about the metaverse. As is probably obvious by now, all of this development brings with it a host of interesting intellectual property problems, but also the potential to use intellectual property in exciting and new ways. So that's what I'm going to focus on next. And this, I'm sorry, I forgot about this one. So this is a slide I didn't make. This is Gartner Group, the big consulting. I like this because I think it breaks down kind of, when you have a metaverse, it's really a virtual representation of our world. And so in that world, you're going to have currencies and commerce and people buying and selling NFTs and people building virtual spaces and gaming, and you're going to have assets that people own. So there are all sorts of things, all sorts of aspects to the metaverse that I think are really interesting, and exciting. In the US, Facebook changed its name to Meta because, they believe in the future of the metaverse. Some people have been less than impressed with their first efforts, and, the avatar of their CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, didn't look so slick. I think a lot of people think that the metaverse, the people who really succeed in the metaverse, maybe aren't born yet or are a lot younger than Mark Zuckerberg, but we'll see. So this is a slide, I know it's a little bit busy, so I crammed a lot in here, but this is my slide to explain the applications of blockchain-enabled technologies. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time walking through this because I think it's important to understand that even though I think a lot of the media attention on NFTs and a lot of the focus has been in digital art, digital collectibles, it's really a much broader asset class, and I'm going to walk through that. So at the very top, the first picture is kind of a collection of some different famous NFTs, Bored Apes and CryptoPunks, and these are JPEGs and digital images that people may buy and collect. What's interesting about some of these, sometimes, and this is, I think, why intellectual property is so important in this space, and why there's so much opportunity. Sometimes when you buy an NFT that shows ownership of a digital image, you're just getting that. You're just getting the NFT that says, I own that digital image. And you can't do anything with it. It's like when I buy a t-shirt with a Coca-Cola label on it. Right? I can wear the t-shirt, I can hang it in my house, I own it, but I can't do anything with it. I can't go create, you know, a new flavor of Coke or anything like that. Or if I buy a t-shirt with Star Wars on it, that doesn't give me any IP rights other than to wear it. I can't create a new Star Wars movie. I can't do anything license the characters. But with NFTs, whether or not you give IP rights to the holder of the NFT depends on the smart contract. And what some of these high profile NFT projects, Bored Apes Yacht Club is a good example. Gutter Cat Gang is another good example. But the ones that are selling for a lot of money are interesting because they give commercialization rights to the holder of the NFT. So it's a little bit like Disney creating a character like The Little Mermaid. And then I could sell to Henry The Little Mermaid, and he has an ownership certificate, and he has commercialization rights. He can go make The Little Mermaid 4 movie, and he can get the profits from that. He can license The Little Mermaid to a brand to sell, you know, beer. Maybe that's not the best brand to sell with, but to sell bathing suits. And that's possible with NFTs. So that's interesting. The other space in the digital collectibles, and I'll talk about it more, all the way on the right, that's the NBA Top Shot. NBA, the National Basketball Association, basically unlocked a huge amount of value. You know, they have a lot of IP, highlight films, you know, all the players doing dunks, hitting 3-point shots. And they created these digital trading cards that are video clips. And they create only a certain amount, like 10. You have 10 clips of, LeBron James making a dunk, all the same, and you can own one of those 10, and it's yours. Now, as human beings, ownership is an interesting thing, and I've thought a lot about this because, you know, the art in the middle there, it's very hard to read, but it's a compendium of 1,000 different small pictures by an artist named Beeple. And that art sold at Christie's, the NFT to that art, with no commercialization rights, just the NFT to that art, sold for, I think, $67 million. Now, some of that may be, you know, some very rich crypto guy bought it. But when I saw that, I was like, why are people buying these things? Now, I don't really understand the real world art scene. Oh, yeah, go. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought someone spoke. You know, in the real world, art can be very expensive, and maybe I don't understand it. And so maybe it's the same in the digital world. But what's interesting is ownership still has meaning. So, you know, today, I think I can print out a perfect digital replica of the Mona Lisa, and I can hang it in my house, but I know that's not the real Mona Lisa. And even though it looks pretty good, it's probably not worth very much money, whereas the real Mona Lisa is priceless. So it's interesting. These are digital objects. There's artificial scarcity. You can create perfect copies, but ownership still has some sort of meaning. So I think that's interesting. The art world is interesting. The art world is a little confusing. But there are other applications that I think, to me, are even more natural and interesting. So one is connecting the digital and the real world. So a good example of this is Nike has a product called the Crypto Kick. So they have digital wearables. So if you have an online avatar, you can have him or her wear Nike sneakers, and you also get the real world sneaker, and so there's a digital twin real life asset. I'm working on a project right now with a company called Young Sneaks. They're selling an NFT of an avatar. The founder of this company was a 10-year designer at Adidas, and designed a lot of really nice sneakers for NBA players. And so that is also a physical digital project. So you get the digital version of the sneaker, and they also are 3D printing and delivering the real world sneaker to you. So you get both. So linkages between the two. The music industry, tickets, access is very interesting. So Yellowheart was another early client of mine. They sell digital tickets. It solves a real problem in the industry, because one of the problems in the industry when you sell tickets is resellers will buy them, right? Scalpers, resellers will buy them. So your real fans can't get them. And then the resellers sell them for many times the price of the ticket. And you, the artist, or you, the venue, doesn't get that money. With blockchain, if you know all the wallets that are buying, you can look at the behavior of those wallets. You can identify resellers. You can design a smart contract that says, I only want to let 10% of the tickets be bought by these reseller wallets. I want my real fans to get the other 90%. You can also set up the smart contract so that when that blockchain-based ticket is sold, so when a reseller gets it and sells your $100 Beyonce ticket for $500, you can set up the smart contract so that on that secondary sale, 25% of that profit goes back to the artist or back to the venue. So it's a very powerful use case for an industry like that. The other area that I think is really interesting is real world assets being tracked in this way. So we have a lot of industries that are very inefficient, and that really could use a system that's good at tracking provenance and title and ownership. One good example is the real estate industry. At least in the US, when you buy a new house, one of the things you have to do is pay a title agent to go and make sure that the title, and they go to the town records, it's all paper. You pay them thousands of dollars and they say, yes, the title is good. Title is a perfect thing to track on the blockchain. It's visible, it's immutable, right? It's not changeable. And you can see all the transactions, who is the owner at this point in time, at the next point in time, at the next point in time. So there are already companies in the real estate market that are disrupting the real estate industry by tokenizing real estate and tracking it on the blockchain. The other application of NFTs, as I mentioned earlier, going down to avatars, digital twins, metaverse gear. If your avatar is walking around in the metaverse, they're going to want to buy clothing and backpacks and things. Talk to your kids about the economies that exist within video games today and what they will pay to dress up their characters. The other last application of NFTs that I'll talk about before moving on, because I definitely want to leave time for questions, is DAOs. A DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. It's basically a firm or a company that's structured just as a collection of people that own blockchain assets. So we all own the same cryptocurrency. We all can get together to do transactions, and we make decisions based on how much coin we have. It's interesting. In the US, DAOs are not recognized as a corporate entity, so there's still problems in dealing with them, but because they're just collections of individuals. So whereas corporations sort of protect liability, DAOs do not. But there are DAOs that are getting together that are doing things like buying basketball teams. There was a DAO that made an offer to buy the Denver Broncos football team. Didn't succeed, but I mean, there's some big transactions that could happen by these just collections of people that don't know each other, that just all collaborate, using blockchain. So that's another interesting application. That's also NFTs. So those are governance NFTs. So why is this space interesting and exploding? Some reasons here: distributed architecture. People think that it's more secure. It's not perfectly secure. You do see a lot of hacks. There are a lot of people talk about this potential democratizing effect, meaning it's easier for artists and creators to be rewarded and to reach markets. I think it does have the potential to that. They still have the problem of reaching big markets. It's hard to do as individuals unless you build community. But to me, as an IP lawyer, I think the fourth bullet is kind of the most important thing. This is the thing that changed my mind. I said that I was skeptical in the beginning, but this gives a vehicle to monetize digital assets that were previously difficult to monetize. It's always really hard to monetize content on the internet. It's hard to be rewarded for creating good art or good writing or good content. And so if we can, create a space where it's authentic and ownership for digital assets is shown and tracked on the blockchain. What blockchain provides is a way to monetize digital assets where people are paying for digital stuff. And to put it very simply, every day we're creating more and more digital data, and every day we're spending more time in digital spaces, which are continuing to evolve. And this gives a mechanism of monetizing that digital stuff. So for me as an IP lawyer, I think that's interesting enough to be in this space. Now criticisms, not without criticism. It's decentralized in theory, but when big companies are still exercising power, is it really decentralized? Some of the valuations when you look at art seem crazy. What is the value of owning a digital thing when you can copy it and replicate it, and there's fraud, right? And then the legal risks. As with any new emerging area, emerging technology area, the law is going to be sort of slow to adapt, and many countries are looking at certainly regulations as to crypto and securities regulations, but also IP. I know in the U.S. the Patent and Trademark Office is studying NFTs and trying to understand, and regulation is coming, and there's cases that are being filed in the trademark space, in the copyright space, that are trying to sort of understand when is an NFT a trademark infringement, when is it not. There's a lot that needs to be sorted out, and I want to talk about some of those potential risks in the last few minutes. But so some of the risks, right? Fakes or fraud. Right? People making NFTs of content that doesn't belong to them, or an IP owner not owning the necessary IP rights to do it. I think here there's a space for marketplace type solutions. I think, if there are trusted companies that can do this validation, I think there's a space for that. And I know some companies that are looking to do that now, but that's an issue. Losing the asset or hacks is another issue, right? Technical failures, theft. I know a person who bought a Bored Ape and it was very valuable to her, and someone hacked her wallet and stole it and resold it 3 different times. So now the holder was not the criminal, and it's a difficult question. How does she get that back? So there's theft. You see, I'm sure, stories of hacks all the time. So that continues to be an issue. And then, unauthorized copies and IP issues, of course. So I want to talk about some of the key IP issues because I think some of them are really exciting and interesting. This is the NBA Top Shot as a kind of case study. And this is my friend, Professor Tanya Evans. She actually had me on her podcast a few weeks ago talking about NFTs. It's called Tech Intersect. But what she said is the NBA is a great example, right? Because they weren't making any money off of all their IP. It was just, collecting dust. And out of nowhere, they have, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue streams from NBA Top Shots. So, creating value from IP is what we do. So I think it's interesting. I do think the sports leagues and NFTs is kind of a perfect combination. I think it's a very interesting space. Now, as I mentioned earlier, what to me is almost most interesting about NFTs is that NFT holders in situations where they get commercialization rights, like I explained earlier with Bored Apes, that to me is so interesting, because when you buy a Bored Ape, for example, you're not only a consumer, you're not only an investor, you're also kind of part of the creative future of that brand, because you can make a deal and use that ape. You can make a movie, write a book, you can create new IP with it. The Gutter Cat Gang is the example, is the sneakers on the top right. That was an NBA player who owns that Gutter Cat, and he partnered with Nike to make those sneakers and sell them for charity, for a charitable cause last year. And because all of this is just digital, what you do with your IP rights is a really big driver of value. So you can have NFTs where you get no IP rights. In fact, most of them are like that, right? I want to buy this profile picture. I want to buy this piece of art. Here's a certificate that you own it, but you don't have IP rights. You can also get commercialization rights, like some of these examples I've been giving. Some of the work that I've been doing recently has been trying to help owners of these NFTs to now use those commercialization rights. They want to partner with brands. They want to create companies around them and do those deals. And those deals look a lot like other IP licenses that we're familiar with. And so it's pretty interesting. All sorts of difficult copyright issues. So, copying and people thinking, oh, the internet is free. So that exists. There are also really interesting trademark issues that I'll get to in the next slide. Very basically, if you want to mint an NFT, you have to own the copyright under US copyright law. It's not enough to have a license, to have a non-exclusive license. And so it's important. So some of the projects we've done is, I have agreements with, photographers and artists, and I want to look at those agreements and make sure I have enough rights to make an NFT. I want to own the copyrights. Brands, like the big brands, luxury brands have been very, very active in the metaverse. Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Louis Vuitton created a game that's like better than Fortnite. That's an immersive digital, NFT space. Nike is they're all filing trademarks, for downloadable digital objects for classes that will translate into the metaverse. And there's some very interesting early trademark cases. Nike filed a lawsuit against StockX. That's a company that warehouses Nike sneakers and allows buying and selling of sneakers. And StockX created NFTs that have the Nike swoosh on them, and those NFTs are selling for a lot of money. And Nike is saying, and StockX says, well, those NFTs they're just pointing to actual Nike shoes that are in our warehouse, and we're allowed to do that. And Nike is saying, no, those NFTs are selling for a lot of money because it has a Nike swoosh, and you're trading off of our brand. So that's a case that's pending in New York. Hermes, the luxury fashion company, has a lawsuit. They have a very famous handbag, the Birkin bag. There was an artist that created what he called Meta Birkins, digital versions of that in the metaverse. So they're suing him to shut him down. He's saying, it's my free right, I'm an artist. They're saying trademark infringement. So interesting cases, or some of the early cases are trademark cases. I know that was a lot of material, like pretty quick, but I think I finished in time that we can open it up for questions. And I'm very happy to take questions. In the slides that I think you have in Chinese language, I also included just some information about our group. And if people are interested, some of the things we do, I've also been doing a lot of writing in the space. And all those articles are available on our website, talking about NFTs in music, IP rights with NFTs, some of the basics. And so if you're interested in more, you can check that out. I think the links are active in the slides, and you can just grab them that way as well. But I'll just open it up for questions at this time. I guess I can stop sharing and we can just talk. Or Henry and I can just talk.
Thank you for Mike introducing lots of new emerging stuff for us. So we learned about the smart contract, NFT, Web3, blockchain, the story of a yellow card, something like this. These are all very interesting. So is anyone here have questions to Mike? I think to understand a little bit is kind of difficult. So maybe we need some time to consider the questions. But
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
I actually have one question.
Sure.
From your presentation and all your exhibits, there was one transaction you do for your client, which is transaction of a digital real estate.
Yeah.
So we purchased a house. We have some theme, we have some mortgage, something like that. But what happened to the digital real assets? What is the kind of risk?
Yeah. So that yeah, that type of work is interesting. So I'm working with one client. It's very interesting. She was working with this artist. This artist actually went to a real building in a couple real buildings in Los Angeles, and 3D. He paid those buildings to 3D image the interior of those buildings, and he created these and they're pretty famous buildings. And he created a perfect digital replica. He's working with my client. My client is an activist who's focused on actually domestic violence, and she's creating an online space that domestic violence survivors can come and get resources on mental health, and she's going to educate them and help them to sort of speak out and learn how to get themselves back on their feet. And so this artist, so I'm actually working on the agreement. I just sent him a draft last week, but you know, she wants to make sure that she owns that digital space and gets all the source code. So it's like a blend of a real estate deal and like a software license kind of. And so yeah, so I'm working on the transaction between that artist where she's purchasing that digital space to use to host people in her metaverse.
Okay, so is that right? Since the value is that kind of digital space, in that some kind of metaverse. So
yeah,
the requirement is that the metaverse need to be becoming more and more popular. Otherwise, the digital real estate maybe sometime just finish or become not valuable, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and look, there are different spaces. I do think it's very early. You know, there's just an article I read on American Lawyer about how some law firms are opening up metaverse offices. I think, you know, some of it is at this point like a public relations thing to show that you're kind of cool. But I think you're right. I mean, you need to have people in your digital space for it to be valuable. You know, there's another client that I'm working with who has a lot of experience in the optics industry, glasses and contact lenses, and she has a very amazing metaverse that looks like New York City, and she's onboarding a lot of those optical companies to set up booths and you know sell through that space. But yeah, absolutely right. Like you know you do need people to come into it. And I think right now it's the early days, and there are many different metaverses. They're not necessarily interoperable yet. So I think there's a lot more development that has to happen for this to be viable. But I do think it's interesting. Like it's an interesting signal that some of these very big companies and brands are investing in it. You know, as a future area.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Is there any questions?
Mike?
Yes.
Hi. I wanna ask you some questions as well. You know, if the audience doesn't have questions.
I think there was one in the chat, but why don't you go first, and then I'll look at that one afterwards.
Yep. Okay. So in Korea, I've heard that you know the Korean patent office started to accept virtual products and services for trademark, designation.
Yeah.
And what is the situation in the United States? If you have any advice on the trademark or patent prosecution in terms of this Metaverse and NFTs, please.
Yeah, great question.
That's
So
it.
on the trademark front, and I did put it is on one of the slides, but there is a class. So the way that the big brands who are going to be in the metaverse, like, and I think my examples were Nike, McDonald's, they are, for trademarks, you want to make sure that you have your mark in the class that covers digital goods. So there's already an existing class in the US. And so whereas before, you may have not, had protections, we're seeing a lot more filing in that class. So I think it's good advice that if you feel there's going to be a digital component or a metaverse component to what you're doing, you should, when you do your filings, you should file in that class. On the patent side, we've done some metaverse related patents for, I've done the patents on blockchain platforms, and also some video game related patents for that help interoperability. I think the advice there and for the U.S. prosecution is kind of the same as kind of the general advice for software patents. I think for many years in the U.S. it was, the law was a little bit of a mess. It was hard to get software patents. I think in the past, 5, 6 years, 7, 8 years, it's gotten clearer. And I think, some of the best practices there, I think are, not the issue that often comes up with software patents in the US is, are you protecting an abstract idea? So I think just being very concrete about the examples and how you solve the problem without sort of overreaching, is important. I've also seen some patents in the beginning, I'm not going to name names, but there are definitely some early patents that some companies have got that seem to cover just very basic blockchain functionality. So I think as the patent office gets smarter and sees more of these, it'll be harder to get really broad patents like that. But yeah, that's about what I can say on the trademark and patent side.
So Mike, we do have questions from our audience. So let me read the questions to you. The question is from Tim Joe. He said that how to design a protection mechanism to protect rights of a new NFT from legal point of view.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. Thanks, Tim, for asking it. I think it's a broad question because I think you have to think through. So you have to think through the different layers. And I know you said from a legal point of view, but I think any sort of protection is going to also sort of think through the technology and business side of things. So I think on the legal, the area I've done the most work on NFTs from the legal side is, defining kind of what the IP rights are and being very clear about that in agreements and thinking through all the different ways that they can be used. And so I've worked on a lot of those agreements and they're very much like license agreements. I think beyond, and I think a best practice is to have those agreements be on the blockchain with the NFT, so it's transparent and people can see. Not everyone's doing that yet, but I think you want to be able to have that the IP rights piece flow with the asset, no matter where it's transacted. Right now, there are lots of different exchanges, and so that's a challenge. I think that the other piece is there's a difference between the NFT, which is the ownership certificate, right, and the underlying digital asset, which is whatever that digital file is. And I think a piece to designing a protection mechanism for NFTs is also dealing with digital rights management for that digital file. You don't want people to be able to copy and fraud and rip it off. So I think you have to approach it at two levels. I think you want to have really really thorough like IP licenses that travel with the asset, and then I think you also on the technology side have to think about preventing fraud and copying and doing kind of locking it down and preventing that. And there there are some market solutions that I've seen that are pretty advanced, and I'm sure will continue to evolve.
Any more questions? And I do have one additional question.
Sure.
You mentioned about smart contract. So I believe that you prepare a smart contract for your clients, right? So I mean, before smart contract, we every day we prepare contract for clients. So what's the additional expertise when you need to prepare smart contract for your clients compared with the original paper contract?
Yeah, so we have, so I think so there are law firms that have thought about that are actually licensing in software so they can actually say, here is the smart contract code. We haven't done that yet. I think that law firms and legal service providers have to think about whether they want to be like a software provider also, and the complexities of that. But certainly the things that are built into the smart contract are things like what IP license rights are flowing, what happens on resale, who are we allowing sell to. So certainly like all of the business and legal things that flow into a contract, all of the financial things, so that we strategize with our clients. So it's very similar to a real contract. Coming up with all those financial terms, what happens in certain circumstances. But then there are software languages. I think the one that's most common is called Solidity, where you take kind of the your input and it will spit out the code. So some will, I think, provide full service and integrate Solidity and provide smart contracts, and I think that might happen more in the future. But yeah, certainly like you definitely want like legal strategy to be in the brainstorming session when setting up the terms, and then you take the terms to someone who creates code from that.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean, in the firm or from the client, you need to have some coding engineer try to put that kind of term into computer or software or in the cloud, right?
Yeah, someone's got to. It might be a service provider that does that, but yeah.
I see. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Any more questions? It looks like we have one other question.
So Tim asked, are smart contracts adopted by a court now? So I don't know that there's been a case on smart contracts. I mean, it is software code, and but if there are two different things. There's the smart contracts that determine like kind of all these financial things, what happens upon a transaction. There are also often like terms of service or terms of use that are legal contracts too. I think the only case I know of so far where a smart contract has been referenced by a court, I think, is in Singapore in order to take down a fraudulent copy. But I think smart contracts, like I said, it's code. It's not necessarily a contract. For a contract, you still need offer acceptance. So in all cases, it's but I think the case in Singapore from a few months ago is kind of the first. There are a lot of firsts. There's also in both the U.S. and London a case where they served process, they served a wallet, and that was kind of the first time that happened. So I think the decentralized nature and the doing more of these legal things in software, I think, are going to necessitate some sort of how's the law going to see that and fit in? But I think, there aren't many cases that have gone all the way through a trial that are on these issues right now. A couple of the trademark cases are still pending. So yeah, I think that's the best I can do on that questions. I think that the Singapore example is probably the closest one to an answer for you, Tim.
Interesting. Any more question?
Sorry，大家也可以自己取消静音，然后跟讲师交流，谢谢。
Yeah, excellent question. So it is important, right? So that is, so listen, so the MBA, it is important that the platform be reliable and sustainable. There are certainly NFT projects that I know in the early days where they come out and they say, we're going to do all these things, and people buy NFTs and then they disappear. And you don't have a lot of value. So I think it's a good point that, a marketplace, like, so the NBA Top Shot for theirs, they actually have their own marketplace. Not all, in fact, most NFTs don't have their own marketplace. They sell in other marketplaces like OpenSea. So, the NBA Top Shot NFTs can exist, out, let me say it this way. NFTs can exist, without the platform, because a lot of them are, the NBA is a special example. They have their own platform. But you're right. If I think a very important part of this is how reliable is, you have to trust and recognize that the person that's selling you the NFT, that there's going to be value there. If there's someone that disappears 3 days from now, you're right. Like, a lot of the value disappears. So I think that's a very important point.
Right.
Question on costs of smart contracts. The short answer is no. There are already software solutions like Solidity that are not terribly expensive to create smart contracts. The cost side of things, though, when you write to the blockchain and create NFTs, when you mint, so for example, you mint to a particular blockchain, there are different types of blockchain companies. Ethereum, for example, is one. So you actually have to pay, it's called gas, is the cost. And gas prices for certain platforms fluctuate with the price of cryptocurrencies. So there are some platforms where the gas fees can get expensive. There are now other platforms that are coming out competing with Ethereum, saying, lower gas charges. But in some instances, there is a cost. There's a cost that can be significant to sort of setting up an NFT. But the smart contract is not usually that piece of it. And I think competition is driving costs down already.
It looks like so many people interested in this topic, and we have a fruitful discussion in this session. So if there is no more questions, let's thank you again for Mike Collins for his interesting topics. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Mike,
Yes.
I'm coming back.
All right.
Good questions and good answers. Very good.
Thank you. That was fun.
So shall we take a break or what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like we have 10 minutes break.
Okay.
Sounds good.
But during the break, if someone have questions or want to meet speakers, Takao or Mike, I think they are available right now. So feel free to just send a text or just say hi.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. 那个红光啊，
嘿，
那个刚刚问题还不错嘛，好像还有好多人问问题是吧？
是，
不错，good，OK。
我这个议题还蛮难的，
对，而且
很新。
还说实在有很多那个技术啦、model 什么还不是那么成熟，有些人正面，有些人不认为说这个这个将来到底要怎么发展也搞不清楚嘛，是不是？所以
对，
确实是有很多新的问题，
我这么新的领域，麦克他已经累积了好多
不简单，而且我看他那个 PowerPoint 做的资料蛮多的。很多那个官司，他自己也都有直接或间接的涉入嘛，对不对？
可能一方面他们 law firm locate 在纽约，所以一些最新的 content 啊，一些技术的发展都在那个区域。
对，很多很多奇奇怪怪的事情都在纽约发生了，好的坏的。
但是
那
很多艺术家都会去申请 NFT，在纽约的艺术家。
所以现在也是这个乱成一团了，跟当初这个刚开始的时候 ，computer software 也是有一阵很乱的不晓得要用什么保护。
塔考 ，Mr. Saido。
好
Yes.
像还有几分钟了。
Yeah, we just have some check, and we feel that it's amazing that for this emerging new area, might already have so many cases. So it's so interesting. It's much more. I mean, I didn't expect already that many cases already happened. But after this speech, I think I learned a lot.
And Mike, most time you spend in New York?
Yeah. My office is in New York.
And I just mentioned that all the legal problems, issues usually happen in New York, right? Good or bad.
Yeah, although this practice I'm working, it's pretty national in terms of, and even international in terms of clients for this area.
Good. And usually, I always suggest keep in touch with Lucas.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Maybe needed. UMC is pretty big company. They have all kind of issues.
Yeah,
So,
no, for sure.
I'm sure they're looking for good attorneys to help them out.
No, definitely. And I know Tim said in the chat, asked if I would suggest a study roadmap. And if you mean like some good reading materials, I can certainly provide that. Maybe I can, if you get me Tim's contact information, or I can send it to you and Henry. I'd be happy to do that.
Good.
Someone have question?
Oh.
So a quick question for Professor Liu. 刘老师，
钟总，
你说明年2月、3月可能会有一个实体的会议，是不是？就是说会organize 一个 conference。
对，而且那个应该会比较大，但是我们又怕太大，因为那个到时候不晓得政府有没有规定说那个不能超过多少人。有一阵子不是政府不希望太大吗？但是以目前看起来，以我们那些 speaker， 很多人就一直写信给我说要来台湾啊，等等，所以看样子人是会不少了，而且还有其他的 event 要
实体的比较实际一点呢。
对了，对，
就说那 interaction 不一样。
没有错，而且你当面，我们当然过去的经验就是一定会有个中间有 lunch 啦，晚上有 dinner 啦，或者是那个 Dr. Goda 还在考虑说，他开会以前，他们律师事务所想在那个金月办了一个 reception 啊等等，那就很热闹了嘛，就不一样了嘛，
是，
对不对？而且实体上就可以跟那些人多交流，而且这些来都是蛮有经验的嘛，对不对？所以对参加人一定很有好处啦。
是很期待如果确定时间跟跟那个就是 conference 的那个已经有确定的话就让我们知道。
好，小凤你听到了吧？
年底如果筹备好就会宣传，谢谢。
好，谢谢。
对啊，这个很多人期待 ，speaker 也期待，听众也期待啊，等等。Mike, Mr. Lee, I don't know he asked a question or not earlier. He is well known in the biotech area. He now is with Academia Sinica, which is #1 research institute.
Wonderful.
And that he got also serve as a government official in that Ministry of Science and Technology and in different capacity. He is suggesting maybe someday we should have in-person meetings. Online is good, but after all, you cannot see talk to the person face to face.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
In person would be great. And in the biotech area, I didn't really get to mention it, but there's a whole interesting area of blockchain that's being referred to as decentralized finance is being called DeFi, and decentralized science is being called DeSci. And there's some companies, especially sometimes it's hard to raise funds for research, especially rare diseases and things. But there's some people, even universities, that are playing around with blockchain. So I've seen some IP NFTs where they're sort of selling license rights, or sometimes selling historical digital thing that relates to some research. But I've seen some universities be successful, and there's a DAO called Molecule. That's out there doing these IP NFTs, which to me just look like IP licenses. It's interesting.
Let me say one more word. I'm always amazed that Paul can organize such a excellent conference with so many outstanding speakers. We are never disappointed. Every time we just learn a lot. So I'm expecting a lot from the conference today and also the one next February or March.
Okay. And we should express our appreciation to Henry Xu Hongguang, because Henry has been working together with Mike and also Takao Saito. And you will find out that Mr. Saito is also, closely related to, lots of communities in Japan. I saw his, resume. He even, is a PhD candidate over Kyoto University, and so incredible, Yep. And for both of you in that science and technology circle, Mr. Dr. Lee is going to be a useful resources for you guys.
红光现在58分了，你可以请日本讲师可以准备把投影片先放出来，节省时间。